Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Before I introduce our topic, here's a quote just for this episode. When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole earth will be converted into a human brain, which in fact it is, all things being particles of a real and rhythmic whole. We shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. Nikola Tesla. Why podcast? Why podcast is the answer is that quote. We shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. The power of podcast, the Culture Matters podcast, is a living, breathing organism. The people that are on the show fit into multiple categories. We have people that I already know and want to get to know better and introduce you to. We have people that the people that I already know and want you to get to know on a deeper level, as well as I want to get to know on a deeper level. We have people that they know that I don't yet know, that you may or may not know, that they introduced to the Culture Matters podcast. So guests introduce new guests to the Culture Matters podcast. As of this recording, 20% of the Culture Matter, give or take, standard deviation of 5% 20% of the Culture Matters podcast guests have been referred by guests of the Culture Matters podcast. So relationships that I already have are introduced to the Culture Matters podcast for me to get to know on a deeper level and for you to get to know on a deeper level, to uncover the genius of our guests with the goal to make curiosity cool. So there's people I know that I want to get to know better and that you can get to know and get to know better. There's people that they introduce, or those relationships, new relationships that may or may not come back. There's those that have been on that then come back, which I guess fits into a third category, is the comebacks. Friends, compatriots, contemporaries, those we were, oh, there's another category. Those Culture Matters works with deeply. Client partners. That word, that two-part word, two words, client partner. They're joined together because of the work that we do. How we do the work that we do exemplifies the word partner. It's a part of our values system as a firm, as a advisory firm, as a partner in growing business, a business with a group of people to provide a product and or service to the marketplace continually. So that's another category of people on the Culture Matters podcast. There's also those that I don't know and want to get to know better. Now, there's a few categories there. There's those higher in the hierarchy, the aspirational figures that I don't know, that I'd like to get to know better, that you can get to know better, whether you know them or not, don't know them. There's those that I don't know that are below in the hierarchy of authority, influence, and power, that I think it's exemplary of culture to lift people up, the hierarchy, to lift up people that either are perceivably and or actually less powerful, with less influence, have less authority. What dictates that? I mean, we live in a free market capitalist society. So generally that would be capital, that would be clout, that would be followership, that would be, let's see, capital, clout. So capital is resources, assets, fandom, I think those are just three that come to mind without thinking it through completely. Now, does that make them less valuable as human beings? Absolutely not. That's why it's very important to bring people on the Culture Matters podcast that I perceive as lower in the hierarchy, whether they are or not, or they're not, because I could be absolutely wrong. It's, there's an infinite relativity of who has more authority, resources, control, and or over their, their ability to make decisions in their lives, fans, right, how obscure one is. Somebody could be, and there's exception to these rules. I'm going to digress into some rant. So I hope you understand my point. There's those I don't know that I perceive to have more power that may or may not influence and authority. Those I perceive to have less. And then, of course, the truth that is revealed in the dialogue and getting to know people. And there's those at the same level of all of that perception and or actuality. But just, so there's those we don't know at those levels. Contemporaries, meant, let's say, anyway. So people I know, so the whole point in this, why podcast? If you're starting, and there's other categories we can get to, people I don't like, people I have problems with, people, whether they know that or not, I'm trying to lean into the relationship and listen and be open to living the values that I'd like to live by. Podcasting, what is a podcast actually? It's, if you take out the technology, I was having coffee with all these people, it would be people that experience in my life. So the Culture Matters podcast specifically is a way for me to teach culture without talking specifically at you. At least the lion's share of the interaction with other human beings. There's specific interviews, there's more conversations, there's panels, and of course there's the monologues and like I'm doing right now. But I want to reread this quote because why podcast? It's an expression of who one is as a human being that will be revealed even below their awareness based on how, me included, by the way, I'm constantly learning about myself, re-listening to the show and being a part of the show and listening and being open to listening to the comments and so on and so forth. But when wireless, this was Nikola Tesla like 100 years ago. When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole earth will be converted into a huge brain. So you're witnessing my brain and how it's connecting on a micro human to human, person to person level with each one of these guests at varying capacity and reflexivity based on the context of our relationship. And this show is my personal sphere of influence. How well I did cultivate new relationships, how well we work with those we work with and develop through those relationships, how well I curate potential new working relationships. And behind the scenes, I'm introducing guests to other guests and introducing guests to other shows because many of the guests have their own podcasts. So connecting guest to podcast, working with people that have no concept over what Culture Matters is as a consulting and advisory business growth partner firm with various services on the agency and consultative side. And so I'm challenging you to think about how a podcast can fit into your life, can potentially improve you as a person, like it is me that I'm attempting to exemplify with leaning into these conversations with all sorts of different people, how you can invite people into your life with others watching you evolve, and how potentially you could build your business through the podcast as a community, as a reflection of your brain and your culture and your network. So the quote, when wireless is perfectly applied, the whole earth will be converted into a huge brain, which in fact it is. All things being particles of a real and rhythmic whole, we shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. My goal with the Culture Matters podcast is to make curiosity cool. And we could do that together. And hopefully this exemplary action of everyone that is in my life, directly and indirectly being involved in my life, coming on this show, revealing who I am and who I become in this journey to power, influence, and authority as a business person, the founder of a business and the business benefiting from the culture, my culture, our culture that impacts you simultaneously. We have ownership, employees, customers, and fans, and enemies and critics and judgments. And it's a living, breathing reflection of me and you and everyone. And it's not just a damn podcast. It's a portal to the brain, my brain, your brain, their brains. And we're learning together as we go, like a living, breathing book. I'm reading books, of course, but I'm reading people. And we all do this every day. We have conversation with people. How well do you listen? What questions do you ask? How prepared are you? Are you telling the truth? What does that even mean? What is the truth? So on and so forth. That's why a podcast. It's just another medium reflecting life. See you next time on the Culture Matters podcast.